Hello everyone, this is Tom Kuhar, entomology professor at Virginia Tech. Today I'd like to fill you in on some pest management research that my lab is doing on corn earworm. But before I begin, I want to acknowledge a couple of individuals, Helen Dowdy at the Eastern Shore AREC, and my graduate student, Katie Britt, who did a lot of the work related to this research objective. Corn earworm is a native moth pest that attacks a whole bunch of crops. In Virginia, some of the crops that are most impacted include sweet corn, tomatoes, soybeans, edible beans, and cotton. Corn earworm has also become the #1 insect pest of hemp, which is a relatively new crop for Virginia. Corn earworm larvae go through 5 molts and increase in size to greater than 1 inch long when they're fully grown. Larvae have many different color variations, but typically have a tan-colored head, alternating stripes that run lengthwise down the body, black tubercles or bumps that also run down the side of their body, and also many tiny spines which are absent in caterpillars such as fall armyworm. Corn earworm pest problems are getting worse for a few major reasons. First of all, winters are getting warmer in Virginia, as this slide shows from NOAA data, starting from the early 1900s into almost present, but you can see the trends that during the coldest parts of the winter, it's actually warmer than a century ago. How does this impact corn earworm? Well, they overwinter as a pupa in Virginia, and a lot of them would typically die during some cold winters. But as the winters keep getting warmer, we're going to have better survival of corn earworm pupa, which would mean more adult moths the following season. Another problem is the wide-scale adoption of Bt transgenic crops, especially in corn and cotton. The selection pressure has resulted in corn earworm populations that are resistant to the otherwise toxic cry proteins that are found in these Bt crops. Because corn earworm typically complete their first development on corn and then move out of corn as moths to lay eggs on some later season crops such as soybeans and vegetables, this means that possibly more moths are going to be attacking these late season crops than ever before. This slide shows some results of a Bt sweet corn evaluation that was conducted last year at the Eastern Shore. This is actually conducted at many locations around the US, including a few in Virginia, but I'm just going to show you Eastern Shore results, which are very similar to pretty much everyone else. The blue bars represent the percentage of ears with corn earworm damage. And note that the 2 Bt varieties that contain the Cry1A or Cry2AB2 genes had pretty much the same amount of damage to the ears as the non-Bt corn varieties, which are found on the bottom. The only event or Bt protein that still works against corn earworm is the VIP3A, seen in the variety Remedy above. So sweet corn growers need to carefully select the proper Bt package if you expect to get corn earworm control. For instance, attribute contains the Cry genes, and this pretty much is not protecting against corn earworm anymore, as the previous slide showed, whereas attribute 2 contains the VIP gene and would provide almost 100% control of corn earworm. But guess which one of these sweet corn varieties costs more? Another serious problem with corn earworm today is resistance to pyrethroid insecticides. This class of insecticides has been the go-to product for corn earworm in most crops for decades. Pyrethroids are cheap and effective against a broad range of pests. Thus, they're widely used, which has been one of their downfalls. This slide shows data from the Virginia Tech Tidewater AREC in Suffolk, Virginia, where they've monitored corn earworm moth susceptibility to a pyrethroid cypermethrin using treated vials. Basically, they put corn earworm pheromone traps out, catch the moths, and put them in these vials that have been treated with cypermethrin at a dose that should pretty much kill 100% of the moths. So survival used to be 0% of moths when they were put in these vials. But you can see by 2008 or so, that about 20 to 30% of moths actually survive overnight in these treated vials. And this is kind of an indication that about 20 to 30% of the corn earworm population is probably showing some level of resistance to pyrethroids. So by 2016, we began detecting actually field level failures of pyrethroids against corn earworm. This occurred in a lot of different crops, but this slide demonstrates it quite well. This was a tomato insecticide trial that was conducted at the Eastern Shore AREC. And note that the only pyrethroid in the trial, lambda-cyhalothrin, a pretty good one, did not provide effective control, or at least control as good as some of the other non-pyrethroid insecticides. And this is the first time that we ever saw this. Pyrethroids, especially like lambda-cyhalothrin, used to be the go-to gold standard to test other insecticides against to see how well they performed. And now pyrethroids don't seem to stand up to them with regards to corn earworm control. So one area of research that's going on, a graduate student, Kemper Sutton, who's working on edamame IPM, is actually looking at, can you add synergists such as PBO, which is Piperonyl butoxide, can you add them to the pyrethroids to actually enhance their control? In theory, this should work, but we're not exactly sure what the mechanisms of resistance are in our corn earworm. So this will help us decipher that and also determine whether a grower might add PBO to their spray tank and actually get very good control of corn earworm and still spray a pyrethroid, which they might be putting in for other insects. However, my lab is also researching alternatives to pyrethroids because the pyrethroids are also very toxic to beneficial insects such as predators that'll feed on a lot of insects, but even eat corn earworm eggs and small larvae. So thus, they're kind of fighting on your side, and you don't want to be spraying things to take them out of the population. And pyrethroids are also highly toxic to bees, something that's become a heightened concern in the last decade. A lot of vegetable crops and even sweet corn require pesticide sprays often during bloom and flowering when the bees would be around. So pyrethroid is probably not something you want to be spraying around that time on the crop. Something else that can be observed is that you'll get outbreaks of secondary pests such as corn leaf aphid. This secondary pest is resistant to pyrethroids, but when you spray it, you actually get outbreaks and sometimes the entire husk covered by corn leaf aphid. The reason for this is that the pyrethroid kills all the things that are eating the aphids, the predators and parasitoids, and then the aphids just explode. There's a lot of examples of these. So every year my lab evaluates insecticides for corn earworm and actually a lot of different insect pests that are important. We probably conduct 30 to 40 trials each year. A lot of these are conducted at the Eastern Shore AREC. But we provide a summary of these. We compile all the trial data and put it into one document that's actually published by Virginia Cooperative Extension. So if you're interested in seeing some of the results of these efficacy trials, you can go to the VC website, click on publications, and maybe search under the name Kuhar. You could find some of our annual summaries of efficacy trials. Just as an example of the type of trials you'll see, this is one that was conducted in fall of 2019 on tomatoes against corn earworm. And, you know, basically what did we learn from this trial? Well, it was a couple sprays that were put out late September and early to mid-October. So this was a real late infestation of corn earworm. But it basically showed you that insecticides such as Proclaim and Proclaim Opti, they both contain the same active ingredient, emamectin benzoate, which is an avermectin, as well as Besiege, which is a diamide plus a pyrethroid, and Radiant, a spinosyn. They all provide the same levels of control against corn earworm under some pretty high pressure that occurred last fall. But it also showed that the additions of some adjuvants such as Activator 90 or Silhouette really didn't change the efficacy at all. So, you know, there didn't seem to be any need to be adding those adjuvants to improve efficacy. Well, corn earworm control in hemp has been a serious challenge. Growers in 2019 suffered some serious crop losses due to corn earworm, and with very few tools at their disposal to use against it. Because hemp is a relatively new crop that's gotten legalized, there's just very few things that are allowed to be sprayed on it that actually work. And then to try to kill a pest like corn earworm, which can be a challenge for even conventional growers, that this is just really difficult pest problem. So we've got a graduate student, Katie Britt, who's working on this, and we're conducting a lot of trials. Here's an example of an insecticide trial conducted at the Eastern Shore AREC in 2019. And it basically shows, after applications on hemp, the numbers of corn earworm that occurred on the crops. And it's quite obvious that the only insecticide that really reduced corn earworm numbers was Entrust, which is spinosad. And although this is a OMRI certified insecticide that organic growers can use, it is not labeled on hemp, and it would be illegal to use that insecticide on hemp. We wish it was labeled, because it does get the job done. Just another trial that was done, this was done in the Blacksburg area, and this was bioassays. We actually collected hemp seed heads and dipped them in spray tank concentrations of various biological insecticides to see, and we put a corn earworm larvae and put it in a solo cup and saw which ones killed the larvae and had potential. And again, Entrust, the spinosad, had the highest mortality. But I'd also like to point out that Zentari is a BT insecticide, and it actually worked a little bit better than other BTs such as Dipel and Javelin, which are BT Kerstaki. Zentari has a little bit different proteins in it that might help to enhance its control. So that might be a better option if you are going to use a BT for corn earworm. In 2020, we also began investigating a relatively new product, Heligen, which is a biological insecticide that specifically kills corn earworm. The active ingredient is a naturally occurring virus called NPV, or nucleopolyhedrosis virus. This is highly specific to corn earworm. It's labeled on almost all row crops, vegetables, and even got labeled on hemp in 2020. It's not toxic to any other organism except corn earworm, so it would be very IPM friendly, not toxic to pollinators, very safe to use. It's also OMRI certified. But how well does it work? Well, in our early sweet corn demo trial on a commercial farm in Blacksburg, Virginia, we actually achieved effective control of corn earworm and sweet corn with applications of Heligen. Sprays were made twice a week for a total of 8 applications. The higher rate of Heligen at 2.4 ounces actually worked a little bit better than the lower rate. But this is some pretty good data indicating that Heligen actually may be a product that growers can use on a lot of different crops, but especially in crops like hemp, where you have some very few options to control corn earworm. So that's all I'd like to talk about today. I'd really appreciate your time, and feel free to contact me for any pest-related questions. My email and phone number are down there below. And thanks again.